Sure. Yeah.
So my name's Joanna Wright, and I'm with Hackensack Meridian Health. I'm actually the director for Women's and Children's there. And Hackensack Meridian Health is a proud sponsor of this special breakout session today. Hackensack Meridian Health is the leading non-for-profit healthcare organization that's the most comprehensive and truly integrated healthcare network in New Jersey, offering a complete range of medical services, innovative research, and life-enhancing care. Hackensack Meridian Health has 33,000 team members and more than 6,500 physicians. The system comprises 16 hospitals. That includes 3 academic medical centers, 2 children's hospitals, 9 community hospitals, 2 rehabilitation hospitals, and more than 450 patient care sites and physician offices. So I just want to remind everybody before we begin that all of the panelists' bios are in your pamphlet that you have from this morning. There will be time set aside for questions at the end of the panel, but please feel free to raise your hand in the middle of it and wait for the moderator to come over. Just as a reminder, this is being videotaped. So I want to go ahead and introduce our moderator. So Herb Ames is our moderator today. Herb is the president and CEO of Devin Group Incorporated, a management consulting company. Previously, Herb served as the director of economic development for Mercer County, where he was responsible for new and existing business growth, relocation, and development. Herb has served on for-profit boards and not-for-profit boards, such as the Boys and Girls Club of Mercer County and the Boys and Girls Club Foundation, Princeton Regional Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Princeton Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Hamilton Area YMCA, and other organizations. Herb is also the author of Aim High, Common Sense Success for Common Sense People. So I'd like to welcome not only him today, but also our panelists, which are Susan Nardone, Nicole Plath, Sandra Powell-Elliott, and Brenda Ross-Dulan. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Just a couple other housekeeping items. Can we put our cell phones on mute or vibrate? Number 2, the restrooms are right out here to the right, so go out to the right and you'll find them. Number 3, we are going to allow questions throughout the presentation. Just raise your hand, and we have a person, Nicole, Nikki will be on the microphone. So just please put your hand up, and we will recognize you. I will give the panel a minute or two to introduce themselves when they talk. So we'll ask a question, we'll get started, and then I will refer back to them and ask them to give them a minute to talk. I will tell you that before you came in here, I was totally outnumbered by this panel, and I got beat up pretty bad. So I'm a little wounded right now because I was in the dining room, but it's okay. I'm getting over it. Susan did not come to my aid until 5 minutes ago, so we will get started. And I'll pose this to any of you, just whoever wants to answer it first. But our first question is, what are your top 5 tips when trying to close a deal? Who would like to go first?
We're all being so deferential. This is a negotiations program, right?
Yes.
Somebody needs to jump in.
Hi, I'm happy to start. So in terms of trying to close the deal, I think the first part is really understanding the side of the party that you're negotiating with and knowing what their goals are, right? Sometimes people think about negotiation, it's like, all right, I just have to argue my point and achieve my goal, but you're not going to come to a compromise and you're not going to get to an end game unless you really understand what your other party needs. So I think doing that research and really understanding their end game is critical. In addition, getting them to understand your perspective, what your goals are, and what you really need out of the negotiation. There are things that we're willing to compromise. There are things that are hard lines. And I think if you communicate up front what your hard lines are, that's going to assist greatly as you proceed. perspective, understanding the perception that your negotiating party has towards you is good, and trying to get to a shared perception of the situation is really critical. Yeah.
Sandra Elliott, Vice President for Life Sciences and Innovation at Hackensack Meridian Health. I think in addition to that, one of the things I would add is always know what your walkaway point is. You've got to be, number one, know what that is from your perspective, also from their perspective. And I think the honesty around a walkaway point is very critical. So being honest up front with regard to what you absolutely must have and that you are truly willing to walk away. I think that's a mission critical issue. I think the other thing is you've got, as you were mentioning, it's really kind of a knowing the other side as well, knowing their walkaway point. And I think one of the things that we've learned, in doing negotiations, all of us, is that sometimes building consensus is great, and sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't. But if you can at least get to that last, what's the last mile, and are you willing to really go that last mile in a partnership? And I think when you put that on the table with an organization or whomever you're negotiating with, you want them to walk with you in that last mile and not just push the envelope. But again, I think the only other thing I would add to that is you've got to know when you're willing to walk away and be willing to walk away.
Brenda?
So I'm Brenda Ross-Dulan. I'm principal of the Ross-Dulan Group. I spent about 25 years in the financial services company. Decided that I wanted to do some consulting that had to do with transforming companies and transforming the lives of leaders. So I'm going to start off, first of all, by saying that what Herb said about us beating him up is really not true.
I second that.
He gives as well as he gets.
That is true.
It's true. So we are appropriately beat up as well. So anyway, the one thing that I will say about negotiation, no matter how good we are and no matter how great we think we are on our feet, never ever wing it. Don't fly by the seat of your pants. And I think you need to go in and you need to be prepared. You need to know what you want. You need to know why you want it. And as has been said, you need to know when to walk away. And if you don't have clarity on those three things, what happens is when you're in a discussion and in the moment and you're making decisions, you tend to rely on emotion. And more specifically, you end up relying on fear. And there are no great decisions that come out of fear. When people are afraid, they do things that sort of end up protecting themselves. They don't look at the other person, and they lose sense of what their real mission is. I won this deal, but then I've lost my reputation. Or you get in a situation where, I'll say as when I was in a large corporation, those three principles still applied, but the notion of really understanding why you're doing what you're doing and understanding what your break points are is going to be really very important, because what happens is you're building your business, you've got this one deal sitting on the table, this deal is the difference between you making your goal and not making your goal, and then you start making compromises and giving up stuff that really doesn't even fit with your core, doesn't get you where you want to be, and then you end up building a reputation that really, quite frankly, isn't what you want to build. So that preparation is critical so that you can get real alignment. So know what you want, know why you want it, very critical. And then, quite frankly, as you said, you got to know when you got to walk away, and you got to have that walk away point, because if you don't, then anything goes, and that's really not the kind of reputation you want to build.
Yep.
Susan?
My name is Susan Nardone. I'm a labor and employment attorney at a firm in Newark, New Jersey. And my perspective on negotiations comes from two things that I deal with in my everyday practice. I'm a litigator. So I am in court, I have adversaries, I have to deal with the things that come with those things, and naturally it's an adversarial process. And we're always negotiating from the time that the case begins until the time that the case finally ends, however it might end. The other thing I do as part of my practice is I'm a mediator. And I've been mediating probably for the last 6 or 7 years. And prior to that experience, I had a very definitive view about the way negotiations should take place. It was always my way, right? I needed to win. I wanted to be the successful party, and I wanted my client to get what they wanted. And then I became a mediator, and I changed my perspective completely on negotiation and what I think a good negotiator is. And I always wondered, when I was sitting on one side of the table of a mediation as a participant, what was happening on the other side. I kept saying to myself, what are they doing over there? And the only way I knew what they were doing is because the mediator would shuttle between us and offer some tidbit of information that would have me scratching my head. Oh, what is it that they're doing over there? What's their strategy? And then I got to see it actually happening itself. I got to see the way things were unfolding, and I learned a lot about my own negotiation style by being a mediator myself. And what I saw, and what I learned about the other side, which I always wanted to learn about, was that there is sometimes a disconnect between what the person is telling you and what they really believe. And we know that's the case. People don't often come to the table straight from the beginning telling you exactly what they want or need. So you're always guessing. What is their final point? What is their walk-away point? People don't always tell you what they really want. I think it's incredibly important to do your homework, and several of us have said that already, but it really is important to know who you're dealing with, know the point that they're coming from, know what their strengths are. I mean, I think being a good negotiator is knowing what's weak about your position and knowing what's strong about somebody else's, and recognizing that fact and knowing that they're going to potentially use that to get you closer to their point of view. So really doing your homework, I think, is critically important. And I'm a firm believer in being a straight shooter. Like, I think my credibility is incredibly important to my negotiations. If people don't think I'm being honest, or if people don't trust what I'm saying, even if they disagree with me, we could come from very divergent points of view. But I think if I can establish credibility, and in my world, a lot of that depends on fact and objective evidence. Not always, a lot of it's subjective too. I mean, we all have different interpretations of the world, and law is no exception to that. But I really think it's important for you to establish credibility as a negotiator, because I think you'll find that that gets people to really move towards your position in a way that they don't feel so much like they're giving up a lot. You know, as a mediator, I see people moving towards settlement, and I say everybody walks away slightly unhappy. That's a successful resolution. Not everybody doesn't get exactly what they want. They walk away with maybe something that they can live with, that their clients can live with, that their business can live with, whatever the case might be. So those are sort of my beginnings on what I think are important for negotiation.
Anybody have a question about closing the deal before I move on? Yes. Let's see if we can hear you.
Sure, I speak pretty loudly. You had stated that you should have walkaway points. How many should someone have? Like, should it be in abundance? Should it be small? Should it be, like, is there, should it be extreme?
I think, having said that, I think there are a couple of things that you've got to kind of take into consideration. Obviously, there are very different issues if you're negotiating for yourself from a salary perspective or a position, for example, as compared to I'm trying to create a deal for an organization or I'm negotiating a contract. I think for me, what I've found is I only have 1 or 2 walking away points because at the end of the day, they're very focused on what am I trying to achieve in this relationship, and I want to touch base on that a little bit, and what is mission critical. There's a difference with what I do from a business perspective in negotiation versus what our attorneys do from a legal perspective, and they have their walkaway points as well. So, but from a business perspective, I only focus in on 1 or 2 things because at the end of the day, if you can stay solid on those because they're important to you and what you're trying to accomplish in this relationship, I think that's enough because otherwise you're becoming too difficult. Now, I will not waver on those, though. I think that's the other thing is we were talking about being very forthright and authentic in what you're saying. And I think that it's interesting because people will kind of take a step back occasionally when I say, this is my, this is the price I need. Well, no, we can't do it. Okay, well, I'm sorry. This is the price I need. I could be flexible over here. This is the price I need. Or these are the terms I need. And because I keep going back and being consistent in my message, it begins to create that credibility and also a lot more comfort in collaborating around that agreement. And for any of us that don't think negotiations is about relationships, they're about relationships. And we were talking about that a lot earlier. And they're very short-term relationships sometimes, and sometimes they're much longer relationships. But for me, most of mine are long-term relationships, and I'm looking for partners who are willing to deal with difficult issues up front, and get those out on the table so we can move forward together and accomplish what we're both trying to accomplish. So just a couple, and be very, very focused in on the fact that it's a relationship. And if you can't negotiate with a potential partner, they're not your right partner. So I think those are the kinds of things that I would really focus in on.
Yeah, if I might just quickly add, I agree completely with certainly everything that you mentioned. I was watching TV, something that I have been doing quite a bit lately. And Pitbull, does everybody know who Pitbull is?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So he has this saying that, never fall too much in love with a deal. You got to be prepared to walk away. But there's a saying that, there's an acronym called BATNA. Has anybody ever heard of that? Best alternative to a negotiated settlement or negotiated agreement. And you can't really reach that if you haven't done the sensitivity analysis, figured out how much you're actually going to, whatever your goal is, you've got to sort of run through what those scenarios are, and then you're able to figure out what your walk away, what are you able to do, what are you not able to do, and that may be one or two things. It can't be a whole laundry list of things, because to Susan's point, it really is about trust. Negotiations is not a blood sport. Mm-hmm. It really is where we all sort of sit down and try and figure out, where we build trust and whether or not there's a long-term relationship. Yeah. That's so very critical. You win the battle, lose the war.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody have anything else to add before we go to another question?
Hi, my name is Amel. I just had a question. In shorter-term relationships, as you guys have mentioned, establishing credibility is still very important, but it's definitely more challenging when it's more of a short-term relationship. So what would you guys say would be good action items to establish credibility in short-term relationships?
Did everybody hear that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I still think that goes back to doing your homework.
Yeah.
If you've done your homework, and maybe this sort of works into some of the question about the walkaway point. So whether it's short term or long term, but since you've asked about short term, you're going to go in there with a certain idea of what you want, right? And you're going to think about what that is before that conversation begins. And you're going to learn as much as you can learn about the other person that you're going to be negotiating with. And I think because you're informed and knowledgeable from the get-go, even though it's a shorter term relationship, I think that helps you quite a bit to start your negotiations. But knowing what you want going into it is also critically important. It's kind of like buying a car, I feel like. Every time I buy a car, I'm never sure if I've gotten a good deal when I walk away, because so what I did the last time I had to do it was, I said, okay, I know how much I want to pay, right? And I'm comfortable paying this. And so I went in and I talked to the person, and then the deal. They come in, they tell you, I talked to my manager, this is the best I can do. Well, I knew that was more than what I wanted to pay, so it was easy for me to say no. And then as I got closer and closer and I got what I wanted, I said, okay, I've gotten what I want, and maybe could I have done better? Maybe I could have gotten them lower. But I went in with an understanding of what I was willing to do, and then I got it and I left. I will admit, I still feel like maybe did I pay too much? Could I have gotten, could I have gotten him lower? Maybe I could have. Maybe I should have done that. Maybe I should have left and come back. But I think that's really important, is to going in short term, long term, whatever it is knowing what you want, knowing what you're really looking for, and being able to work within that framework.
I think another good way to establish a short-term relationship is to be empathetic to the person that you're dealing with. Take the time to really listen to them, what their side is, what their goals are, what their reasonings are for their side of the situation. And I think when you display that you're looking not just to achieve your own goals, but you want to help them win as well, that really helps develop that relationship quickly in the short term.
How many of you are going to be buying a car in the next 30 days? Do not take Susan. She's going to give the farm away. It's at her number.
I'm still wondering.
Next question. I guess, Sandra, you can start off with this one. Let me ask you this one. Going back to the basics, we talk a lot about soft skills and how at times people lose sight of them. What are some of the suggestions for ways to improve and master soft skills?
To improve and master soft skills. Well, I think the interesting thing, as you were mentioning, is empathy. I mean, you've got to really understand that the other side of the table is just like you. We're all people, right? So humor always is a great thing, by the way, because you begin to learn a lot about people, and it takes their kind of defenses down a little bit. I think the other, trying to figure out how to best say this and give it as a how to improve. But I think one of the things that I've tried to do over the last few years is really key in on listening. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to listen. And listening is not just hearing. It's truly trying to understand what's behind the words. And words do matter, but also where those words come from is critical. So I think one of the things that I would suggest highly, particularly as it relates to listening, is you have two ears for a reason. And really take the time to not interrupt, not get to solutions, not try and figure out how to close this deal as quickly as possible, but truly listen to what is being said. And sometimes it's just as easy, even though it's very hard, and I'm sure all of us up here are type A's, and it's very hard to stop. Is try to just listen and say, look, I just want to listen. And I mean, there are ways that you can say that without saying, I'm trying to improve my listening skills. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut, and I just want to hear what you say. But if you can actually just keep your mouth shut long enough to truly listen, don't look at your phone. Literally look into the eyes of the individual and give them, it's a sad thing to say it this way, but truly give them the face time that they deserve. You want that same kind of face time with them. So I think it's, the first thing I would say is listen not 2 times more than you speak, but probably more like 4 times. Because if you're a quiet listener and truly pay attention, you begin to learn a lot about the organization or the people that you are actually negotiating with. And that goes, so far in really trying to understand, and also that they are paying attention, they're going to give you that same level of attention. So to me, it's about listen 4 times more than you speak. And those of you that are here from Hackensack Meridian Health, please remain quiet. Don't tell them I speak a lot.
Before you, let me just mention the other 3 soft skills. Taking accountability, creative thinking, and emotional awareness. Go ahead, Nicole.
I was just going to add.
I will say one thing on that you're talking about. Negotiation is not a blood sport, which I totally appreciate, because it's not about winning in many ways. But I think accountability is not, in my mind, a soft skill. And while it seems like a soft skill, That is a hard skill, let me tell you. You've got to build in accountability for yourself, but also accountability for the other organization or people that you're working with. You have to be willing and courageous enough to hold them as accountable as you're going to hold yourself or others are holding you accountable. And I think that's when it gets really rough. And so I even though we say it's a soft skill, it's one of the hardest skills to really master and hold true to kind of your own ability to stand tall in your own shoes because you are accountable, and it gives you a much different position. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm actually learning a lot sitting here. So she said, do not, I think this is probably what went wrong in the last discussion I had. I sort of announced, I am trying to improve my listening skills. Doesn't really quite go over well, right?
No.
Yeah, but this gives you a sense of what Herb had to deal with before the panel started. But I'll just say something really quickly. One of the things that you'll hear a lot is this notion that is just strictly business, is not personal. And that's never the case. I've never been in a discussion, never been in decision-making when it was purely intellectual, purely factual. It's very, very emotional. And if you don't believe that everyone has a story, and if you don't care that people have a story when you sit down with them, you have completely started off on the wrong foot. I'll say really quickly that one, in addition to listening, you also need to ask questions. And they talk about this notion of asking diagnostic questions. How do you actually ask questions that get to what are your fears? What are your concerns? What are your priorities? Because it touches on those things that really, that may not be, the numbers that are on the page, but the anxieties that people have when they're sitting down at the table. And I had a gentleman that worked with me, very, very smart, worked through all the numbers. Sorry, nose is running. And we were co-presenting on a deal, and all the numbers worked, and somehow I kept getting pushback from him. We knew that the proposal that we presented was going to be the right one, but he had gotten word that somehow somebody on the panel wasn't going to like what we presented. And so I said, well, let's sort of talk through that. Well, it turns out he was very, very risk averse, because the last time he presented something, he ended up getting, he was laid off of his previous job, and he became very, very risk averse. And so that pushback and that what felt like antagonism really was based on the fact that, look, I've got a family to feed, and if I go too hard here, I'm going to lose my job. I mean, it may seem extreme in that moment, and this is probably more of an extreme example, but if you don't listen to people or ask them questions or even care that something happened before they walked in the room, or they had a story before they walked in the room, all of the analysis that you've done, it's for naught.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really for naught.
Right, and I would say going hand in hand with listening is making sure that you've comprehended what they're telling you. So oftentimes I will say, okay, I appreciate what you've said. This is what I've heard, and this is how I took that, and am I right? And kind of repeating their point to make sure I have a clear understanding, because we all communicate different ways, and sometimes what I'm trying to explain to you, you're taking it in a different way. So I think it's critical that you make sure that you get to that shared perception.
Susan?
Yeah, I think establishing common ground it can really be a very good soft skill as part of your negotiation strategy or tactics. Years ago, I took a Dale Carnegie course. Everybody probably knows who Dale Carnegie is.
I think we're dating ourselves
right?
if we do.
Our firm did it. So I thought, this this is like another thing I really don't want to do, but I did it anyway. And I will tell you, it was really fabulous. It was another thing that I learned something about myself in the process. And one of the things we had great trainers, and maybe that has something to do with it, but one of the things they taught us was how to establish common ground and how to learn something about the other person right from the start. We have so many things in common. I mean, Nicole and I were just talking. We both found out in the first 2 minutes that we both love to drink tea. So we were talking about the tea that we like to drink. I mean, where you went to school, where you grew up, the things that you like to do. They're tremendous icebreakers. Women tend to be very collegial. We're all looking to collaborate and try to bring everybody together. And I'm not saying that isn't always an effective negotiation strategy, because we know it's not. And a lot of times we really need to take a very hard line. And we don't want the fact that we like collegiality and collaboration to make it look like we're weak negotiators, because we know that we're not. But I do think there is something to be said for trying to find something in common with the person that you're negotiating with. I just tend to think it brings down some of those barriers to negotiation that some people come to the table with, whether intentionally, knowingly, or unintentionally.
Any questions on soft skills? Yes.
Hi, I'm Jessa. Thank you for being here. This is really awesome.
You know, can I get you to stand up? So I just want to make sure everybody hears you. Thank you. Want the microphone? Take the microphone.
Little dance. I'm Jessa. I just had a question. There are two schools of thought. Some people, Susan, you say, come to the table, be very direct, know what you want, and be upfront about your needs. There's another school of thought that is, keep your cards close to your heart. Don't divulge everything. I play poker. I always win because I keep my cards to my card. So, how do you read the room, or could you shed some light on scenarios or very, very specific scenarios where you might want to come to the table and show all of your cards versus keep maybe one or two or all of them closed?
Well, I did say be a straight shooter, and I don't mean to suggest that means putting all your cards on the table from the start. I really, when I say being a straight shooter, I mean establishing credibility with the other side. What you strategically behind your persona to the other side, which is establishing that credibility and being very direct, is all the strategy that you have in mind that's going to get you where you ultimately get to. Because I will tell you, in the litigation that I handle and in the mediation that I do, I don't tell people what I want right from the start. But what I do is I try to come from a position that is a reasonable one, and that is one that I can justify. They may not agree with it, but if I say, here's why I'm looking for this, I think that helps me quite a bit. I can't tell you how many people, and I don't mean to tie this to legal so much, but I think it's probably true in a lot of businesses too. People come into a negotiation to resolve a matter, and it's always about money, right? In my world, it's always about money. And I know that what they're telling me is not what they really want. And I don't expect them to tell me what they really want. But when they say, here's what I want, and here's the 4 reasons how I got there, it really helps me quite a bit with my client, or if I'm the mediator with the other side, to say, here's what they want, and here are the 4 reasons why they want it. It may not be the real reasons, like to your point, holding the cards closer, but at least it establishes some credibility right from the start. I do think you do need to read the room a little bit. I don't like when people are not straight with me. I don't care if they take an unreasonable position, if they can somehow justify it. I feel like I can work within that framework. If they're completely off the charts and I can't figure out there's no methodology that I can use that will help me understand where they're coming from, I'm very inclined to just say, you know what, no thanks, we're done. And that's what your walk away point, but you got to be ready to do that.
1 second. Any other comments from the panel?
I just had one comment. I mean, I think what you're holding close to your heart is your end game. right? So when I'm preparing for a negotiation, I always start with, if it was like rainbows and unicorns and I could have anything I wanted, like, what would I get? And I know I'm not going to get that, right? You're not going to get that scenario. And knowing my other party, I try to anticipate, what are the things that they might be asking of me? What are the things that I'm willing to come down on? What are my hard lines that I'm really not willing to give up? And having factual backup for those things. Right? So like I had a negotiation recently and a member of that company's in the room, hi Amelia, where we had a guideline passed down to us from Fannie Mae, reducing our allowables for what we're allowed to charge for a search. So that's a hard line. I can't do anything about that, Best case scenario would be, hey, can you just give me all of this you were previously giving me for this little amount instead? It's not realistic. But we were able to come up with a very unique solution with a lot of out-of-the-box thinking to get us to a place where I could maintain that pricing level, keep the work, and both of our companies benefit from that. So, hold your end game in and just anticipate all the different levels that it could go and try to have as much backing for that as possible.
Sandra or Brenda?
Go ahead, Brenda.
The one thing that I go back to in any negotiation is the fundamentals of trust. So if you're giving the impression that you're not trustworthy when you're holding stuff back, that stands in the way of negotiation. Mm-hmm. So you start talking about issues of transparency, credibility, what kinds of things can you share that create credibility, your rationale for how you got to that number, what options help them talk through the options that are there. So I completely agree, you can't just put all of your cards on the table, but you got to be careful about sending the message that somehow you have some sinister intent, if you will, in the way that you are negotiating with them. And so the extent to which you can make your intent one where you're trying to reach agreement, and that your rationale for the position that you're taking is not one that negatively impacts them.
Yeah, and I think, kind of along that lines is if people are willing to give you insight into, kind of where they're heading, you can begin to build that trust. Don't be afraid to just ask. I've had situations where I feel like really just go ahead and get the blood out. Come on, you're wanting everything here. What is it that, you can put on the table? And sometimes you just have to be direct and say, you're not talking a lot, you're not giving any, I'm just not getting a sense that this is something that you want. Because if you really want to work with us, then we need to figure out how to collaborate and have a communication. So I wouldn't be uncomfortable as well when you start reading the room and there's and some of it's just organizational culture. Some organizations are very non-transparent in what they put on the table, and you just have to kind of bust through that if you can, and if they're not willing to be transparent or begin to have some dialogue where you can begin to learn and connect with them, then it may not be the right partner again.
Yep.
We have two questions. You were next, and then this young lady, we have her question. 1 second. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Samantha. With globalization and the internet, we have seen negotiation different. It's no longer bringing it to the table. There's no body mechanics that you can read in the room. It's all pretty much written. A lot of people don't know grammatical, etiquette. So how do you really read that tone of that email when you're doing that negotiation with someone that's in Canada? Or maybe just in New York City, but you'll never see them, to ensure that your company gets what they need.
Did everybody hear that question? Good.
That's a very good question.
I think that's where clarification becomes so important. So just like when you're having a conversation, you can say, okay, I heard this, am I right? You can do the same thing over email and say, this is how I've interpreted what you've said. And also, I mean, you have Zoom, you have a lot of ways that you can, there's a lot of ways that even though you're not in the same location, you can still get face-to-face contact. Heather of my office uses Zoom more than I think any person on the planet. And we use it for sales, we use it for meetings. There's WhatsApp, there's a million applications out there. Everybody's got a camera on their phone where you can have some face-to-face contact and clarify what you're trying to accomplish. So it doesn't all have to be across a certain medium. And there are certain times where I've said to a client, look, I think this warrants just a deeper conversation. So even if you can get on the phone with somebody, there's inflection in voice where you get a better idea of what they're trying to communicate. Because, tone in an email, I'm still looking for the sarcastic font so that I can use that.
I would love that.
I really want one. I want to develop a sarcastic font.
Anybody else have a
I
comment?
have an idea what to do with it.
No.
Oh, this is the best practices
You best
session?
keep it private.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay.
Anybody else have a comment
That's
on
at one.
that?
Okay, great.
I do agree that technology has expanded so much. There's no reason why you have to do that by email. And I realize that sometimes time differences are accounting for the fact that you need to email. And sometimes just hours that we work, we're responding to emails at 24/7. So that's the easiest thing for you to do, maybe to respond by email. But technology is such that, we can communicate face to face in so many different ways, as Nicole mentioned. And I think we underestimate the art of picking up the phone, and I am completely guilty of this. And I'm changing it after today. But I tend to send a lot of emails because I think they're less intrusive to the people. Like, I'm just trying to get a second of your time, so I'm going to shoot you an email, and then I'm not interfering with your day, and you can answer when you have time. That's always been my philosophy. Well, it's changing, especially when you're talking about negotiations. I really think picking up the phone instead of sending email, it can be really important, and I think it helps to bridge that gap that sometimes exists when you're negotiating, which we always know is the case.
And the only other thing, which is a very lost art these days, is writing skills. I mean, you've got to be very thoughtful in your writing, and I have a tendency to write an email, just free thought, and then I go back and say, what the heck did I just write? I mean, and so because we are so busy, I think, I spend a few hours a year really trying to focus in on learning how to write better, because you can't underestimate the value of clarity. And sometimes you can convey emotion and in very different ways using words, but I think that we have a tendency to text in our emails or communications with short bursts, and it's writing is a lost art, and it's just like picking up the phone and having a conversation. We haven't really worked in exercising those skills, and I think we need to have that.
And find an editor.
That's it.
I have a woman in my office, Melanie. She's amazing with grammar and all of that. But when I have a very important email that I need to write, and it is that type of communication, I'll have her come in. I do not tell her my goal for the email, what I'm trying to accomplish. I have her read it over, and then I say, how are you interpreting this? What are you getting? And if that doesn't match up with what I'm trying to say, I will then make those modifications and review it again with her. So it's always good to have somebody in your back pocket that you work with, just to review it and make sure you're communicating the way you intend.
Yep.
Yep. And I'll just say, don't underestimate the power of research. Before I send a proposal out, there may be something specific to a particular industry, to a particular culture. There may be specifics, relative to certain parts of the country. The internet is a powerful source. It's even better than the World Book Encyclopedia, if anybody ever remember that.
Britannica.
You probably don't remember that. But research is really very important because it does sort of get you to a place where you respect the sort of expertise or the cultural differences. And then that, of course, can be incorporated into the conversation and, of course, the writing. Writing is incredible. I'm surprised. It's incredible the number of people who really do not write effectively.
Yeah, I agree.
One last question.
Just to go back to what we were
Microphone.
talking about before about
Microphone.
Oh.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to, I guess, go back to what we were talking about before about holding cards closer to your chest when you play cards, and in negotiating a deal. I think part of it is that when you approach a deal and you want to close on it, you don't want to necessarily always be on the defensive, because that clouds your vision about the larger picture, and you have to remember what the bigger picture is. And what you consider to be a vulnerability isn't always a vulnerability in those situations, and it just takes you longer to get to where you need to go. In addition to what you were saying about, at the end of the day, somebody is going to know, it always comes out somewhere down the line that, oh, this was out there. Yeah. And it does create a cloud on that thing. And the other thing about email communications and text, I'm an attorney, and I'm always careful about what I put in writing, because everything becomes discoverable in a negotiation context, especially when it comes to what is the mutuality of the minds. And now, even I went to go lease my car, and they had all the texts between me and the customer sales representative ready there for me, and that was just me normally, communicating to the guy, yeah, I'm going to come in at 9 o'clock. No, I'm going to come in at 10. Oh, this is the car I'm looking at. You don't know what's out there and what people can use. And that's me being defensive. So.
Yeah.
When it comes to cars,
Don't be defensive, but
everything is.
Thank you. How important is body language to negotiating?
Very critical. Your body language, how you carry yourself, that has to back your point. If you don't go in strong, if you're not displaying confidence, if you're not making eye contact, you could be talking about what you want and that you're really strong, but if your eyes are down and you're hunched down and you're not really engaging, they're not going to listen to your point. So you have to really be there. You have to be present. You have to sit up straight, fix that posture, make sure that you're engaged.
I agree.
Own that room. Let's go, ladies.
And from the last thing, not to ever wear a blue suit. If you wear a blue suit, you're in trouble.
Really? Why blue?
Oh, they said no blue suits anymore. You can't wear a blue suit.
I didn't hear it, but I'm wearing blue.
Apparently, this is that was the story we heard last time. Anyway, just joking.
It's interesting because there are a lot of books and things that you can find even on the internet of just body language is extremely important, and you can tell by people's eyes, where they look. There's so much that you can learn from body language. Yep. So it's extremely important. I think it's not only just important to have good body language and know what that is, but it helps you also read what's going on with the person that you're negotiating with or the people that you're negotiating with. So it's extremely important. It is one of those soft skills that I think is probably extremely underrated. Some things become intrinsic, and you know those, and you feel them because of just your experience base. But don't be afraid to begin to learn how to use body language in negotiation, because there's this one thing that I picked up, and actually it's a funny story. So I was at a conference, and I started talking to this physician, and he was talking about how he spent a lot of time working with con artists. And I'm like, excuse me? And he said, well, he wanted to figure out how he could get his patients, he was a pulmonologist, his patients to really put down the cigarettes, literally stop smoking. And he didn't have really good results. And so he decided, you know what? Con artists are really good about getting you to buy in. They'll give you your money. They'll believe you're God. Whatever it is that they're trying to con you about, they know how to do this. And build trust. the whole 9 yards. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. It's pretty cool. So, but what he began to teach me is that, you can bring people to a point, particularly when you're thinking about negotiation, if you really understand how to read people. And reading people is listening and watching their body language. And so I think, it's extremely important. And by the way, even where they send their eyes when they're thinking about something can tell you a lot about what's going on. So I would encourage you guys to even do a little research. Yes, con artists are I haven't, for those of you in the room that are attorneys and in the healthcare field, we are not con artists when we talk about things. We really believe what we're saying. But anyway.
Any further comments? Any questions on body language? Let's move on to the next question.
Now I'm self-conscious about my body language.
The one thing I will say is, as it relates to body language, don't be confused by who's in the room. Sometimes we start talking to the person that we think is a decision maker, and really the person that's sitting in the corner that's quiet, that is not saying anything, the person that we dismiss, person we don't make eye contact with. We're being deferential to the guy in the room when the woman is really the person in charge. So to me, that is as critical from a body language perspective as well.
It's an interesting, because I guarantee you, how many of you have been in the room where most of the, I'm sorry guys, but most of the conversation starts happening with the guys? That it's a default.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks the default is that the man in the room or the men in the room are the decision-making individuals. And I find it very funny and fun to just let it roll.
Yep.
Just let it roll, and then finally you get to a point where you say, excuse me guys, I'm the one that makes the decision in this.
Yep.
And you can leverage that to put them off, kind of get them off their game a little bit, and it creates a lot of opportunity. But again, sit back, listen, pay attention to what's going on, but don't be afraid to use your power as well. And I think that it's sometimes hard for us to do that. And yes, I'll go and talk to the guys that work for me and say, can you believe how misogynist he was? Oh my God. It's like, no, we can't believe that. Yeah. I couldn't believe he did that. I thought it was so funny. And I'm like, but you didn't stop them. But anyway, no. But we do have fun with those kinds of things, and sometimes you can make it kind of fun. But anyway, I think a couple of things is really don't lose your leverage as well.
Yeah.
Use your power in those situations.
So to follow up on that, is negotiation a skill for which men are simply better socialized than women?
Well,
oh, believe me, I'm going to win this negotiation. I got beat up before all y'all came in here.
sure you want to ask that?
I'm going to win this one. By 2:45, I would have won.
Yeah, I would say yes, and it was interesting, and men are essentially taught that they actually deserve the deal. They, this is their deal. We go in thinking, we got to really fight for it. I mean, even for example, you think about interviews. I was reading where a man will apply for a job if he meets 60% of the criteria that's in that job description. A woman will apply for the job, if they reach 100%, only if they meet every single criteria. And part of it is what they call the disinclination to be self-serving, the idea that we really truly don't understand our value, and then we're always in this place of trying to project confidence, but don't be arrogant. Be strong, but don't walk away with people labeling you that thing. And advocating that thing, because I am being taped.
Forgot that.
Forgot that.
I forgot that.
And even something as controversial as just what recently happened at the U.S. Open with Serena Williams. I mean, no matter where you stand on what her position was, the idea that women have to behave in a certain way and advocate for themselves, they're always sort of second guessing, are they showing up appropriately and trying to fit in that box. And so therefore, I think socialization absolutely has completely undermined our confidence. And we walk in, we're not quite sure. We know what we want, but we don't want anybody to label us as being something that we're not supposed to be. And so it neutralizes our power, it neutralizes our individuality, and it puts us in a place where we don't believe that, that in many instances we don't deserve. I mean, a lot of times if you think about it, women walk in the room, and part of the power that you have is just simply believing that you belong in that room.
Absolutely.
A lot of times you're sitting at the table, you're having a discussion, you're making your point. It's not as if you're making your point saying, this is this. We spend our time justifying, going through all the criteria for why what we're saying is what it is, rather than just saying what we need to say, because we don't believe that we belong in the room. Part of the power is you got to believe that you belong in the room. Right. You don't believe you belong in the room, then you essentially you're trying to climb up to the table where the guy is already there. And trust me, he only met 60% of the criteria. You met 100%. Sorry, Herb.
Yeah. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to say a couple things. One, we will be back at 1:40, and we will continue this conversation. But does anybody, because you have lunch at 1:40, but does anybody have any questions right now about anything? We have 5 minutes. Get them out. Throw them at this panel, please. Somebody has something. Yes.
I know a lot of women struggle with self-promotion, and obviously, as we've heard here today, men don't always have that same set of burdens going into negotiations and whatnot. So my question is, how do you internalize it? How do you think about how you're going to position yourself relative to the men in the room? Do you have any advice that you would give your younger self or yourself even today?
I definitely have advice I would give my younger self, even myself a year ago. I have advice I would give. I think, and I hate any generalization because we know it doesn't apply to everyone, but women tend not to brag about themselves. They think that their actions are going to speak for them, and that if they work hard and they do good things and they're doing their jobs and they're doing their jobs well, they're going to be recognized. And it seems like it should be that way. Merit is going to pull me up and get me to where I need to go. And unfortunately, I don't think that's true. I think, yes, those things are critically important to your success, but unless you are out there asking for that next thing or putting yourself in a position where you can get that next thing, it's not likely that it's going to happen for you, because there's other people, maybe other women who have that skill, or a lot of men who aren't afraid to toot their own horns and put themselves out there as having done a very good job and being deserving of whatever it is. That's something I have looked at in the last year for myself. I've been practicing for 25 years. I've been with my same firm for 20 years. And I've spent some time in the last year looking back over my career and saying, what did I do or what could I have done differently? And I think what I didn't do that I should have done was spoken up more about me and the value that I brought. And I think this, by the way, works into our conversation about negotiation too. Because when you come into that negotiation, I think you have to be self-assured You know, your position is a good position. You don't need to be the one to back down. Women are consensus builders, I think, and we all gravitate towards that because we want everybody to generally be happy. Well, that can be a great negotiation strategy, but sometimes it's not so great. So you have to go, I think, into whatever it is you're doing, whether you're asking for a promotion or you're negotiating a deal, come from a position of strength. Don't go in there and think people are going to just think you're good because you've proven yourself over the last years. Go in and say, this is what I want, in a respectful way. This is what I want, and here's why I want it, and here's why I think I deserve it. Whether it's part of a deal or a request for a promotion or whatever it is, you got to ask.
Yep.
You have to.
Okay, we have a hard stop. I'm sorry. We will be back at 1:40, but wait, I have to bring back Joanna. Please give a round of applause to your panel. They'll be back at 1:40. And quite naturally, I can't wait to be back with them.